Hello, my name is Tom Russell, and I am a registered piano technician with the Piano Technicians Guild. Let me explain what a registered piano technician is. There's a national organization called the Piano Technicians Guild, and to become a registered piano technician, you have to undergo a series of exams: a written exam of basic knowledge, a technical exam covering all the technical aspects of rebuilding and maintaining pianos in a home setting, and a tuning exam to make sure that you can tune pianos with great stability at the highest levels. The designation that you will see after your piano technician's name is RPT, and that stands for Registered Piano Technician. So that's something that I was able to accomplish many decades ago, and on top of that, for the last 25 years or so, I've been a university technician working on university pianos pretty much at the highest level of performance and maintenance, and that's why we're here today. We're going to be working on a university piano, Steinway B, which has been in this room, a teaching studio, for the last 40 years. This piano was built in 1980, and it's been here for that entire time as far as I know. The piano has been regularly tuned, but has not had any voicing or regulation done on it for at least the last 20 years or so. So the project we're going to undertake over these next couple of weeks is not only voicing and regulating the piano, but replacing some very important parts. We're going to be replacing the hammers, the shanks, and the flanges, and I will show you those parts here in just a minute. We can talk about those in greater detail. Okay, let's turn to the piano and see what it sounds like and talk about what we're going to do with it. A 1980 Steinway B with all original parts. Let's listen to the piano for a few minutes and just see what it sounds like and feels like. I actually know this piano pretty well because I've been working on it for 25 years, but here we go. Well, let's just start with a few chords. And I always listen to a chromatic scale as well. That's playing every note throughout each octave. That way you can listen to the evenness of the tone as you're playing through that scale. And with individual notes, some of them really stand out. Like this one. This has a really dull sound. It doesn't sound like its neighbors. See, that has a lot more clarity than that note does. And these are the things you can pick out playing a chromatic scale. Different notes will jump out. And part of the process we're going to go through, the voicing process, will even all those sounds out. And working with new parts, we'll have great ability to even out the tone. Usually I'll play a little piece too, just so I can feel what it sounds like to the player. I'm not much of a player myself, but I work for people who play very well. The other thing I often take note of when I'm playing the piano is the pedals. And on this piano, it has one thing that we'll talk about more later, but oh, that would really bother the player if they press the pedal and it squeaks like that. And then even the soft pedal, the shift pedal, is a little bit on the noisy side. That's going to be hard to correct, but I think that we can work with that situation too. So there you have it. We play the piano, we notice that it sounds very unfocused, that it has a harsh tone, and from a dynamic perspective is not well controllable. And those are all things we're going to work on in the voicing and regulation process, and then the big improvement with the new parts. Might be nice to take a moment to talk about the specific parts that we're going to be replacing and the kinds of things we're going to be doing as we think about the mechanics of the piano itself. What most people see is a set of black and white keys and some pedals and maybe the strings, but when you pull the action out of a piano, you get to look at the detailed mechanics, and they are very complex instruments. Even though there aren't that many moving parts, and they're all greatly adjustable, and they all can be regulated and worked on at a high level of detail to provide great control to the advanced piano player and great tone for piano players at all levels. Okay, well, now that we've listened to the piano for a few minutes, let's go ahead and pull the action. We'll talk about the mechanics of the instrument. And on a Steinway piano, it's very straightforward. I just have to remove 2 screws, and then I can start taking things apart. We'll take the key slip out. And then we take out the fall board. Just slips right out. And I can take the key blocks. This is a key block, or also known as a cheek block sometimes. The treble key block. I'll set those there. We need to use those in the regulation process sometimes to position the action properly. And then on grand pianos, the entire action just slides right out. The key frame pulls out, and then the stack is revealed. So now we can have a closer look at the piano. These hammers are deeply grooved and flattened. Now, as I mentioned, this piano was built in 1980, and probably around the year 2000, 20 years ago or so, I had a chance to do some detailed regulation work on that. And at that point, I reshaped the hammers and filed them down and did a lot of adjustment and voicing. But in the last 20 years, this piano has been heavily played at a high level, week after week and year after year. So things are really out of whack. So what we're planning to do on this process is replace the hammers, the shanks, and the flanges. That's just these parts up here. They're flattened and deeply grooved, and they're loose on the flanges. And then another thing that we'll probably do is replace the bushings in the keys. These move back and forth quite a lot. You can see some of these are very loose. And there are things that we'll replace. We'll talk about those more later too, that we'll replace under here to make those work better. The other things that we're going to take a quick look at right now are some of the points of regulation. The things I'm going to be adjusting are how high, if you push down slowly on the front of the key, how high up that hammer comes before it reaches its highest point. That's going to be adjusted. How far it drops after it reaches the highest point, that's called the let off. That will be adjusted. So you can see it goes up and then it just drops down to a certain point. And then where it back checks, this is where the back checks catch the hammer tail, and then how high up it comes when you release it. All those are regulation points that, when adjusted properly, allow the advanced piano player to have complete control over the hammers and how they strike the strings. So their dynamic capacity is greatly improved. Those are all the things we're going to be adjusting in my shop. And then we're also going to be replacing the front rail bushings or refurbishing them. That's another thing that needs to be dealt with. So these keys don't move around so much. The important thing in pianos is controlling the amount of friction in in all the bearing points. All those different amounts of friction add up to a very smooth feeling action if they're controlled properly. And now perhaps I'll slide this action back in and we can take a look at some of these parts. All right, now on this partial action rebuild for our 1980 Steinway, the most important parts we're going to replace will be the hammers, the hammer shanks, and the flanges. And this is a 1980 original part out of another Steinway B. And you can note down here, this has a kind of a white, pale white circle right there. That's the hammer flange bushing. And this bushing is made out of Teflon, which Steinway did for several years, but they switched back from Teflon to felt. So these old Teflon bushings are going to be replaced with new felt bushings. You might also note that this is a flattened and grooved hammer here. That hammer will be replaced. And then the hammer will be arced properly. When you get a raw hammer, it's kind of got a blocky end, and each hammer has to be individually shaped so that the curve meets properly with the back checks. So that's another thing that will be done. Here's an example of the part that will be used. This is a Steinway shank and flange combination. So you note that this has red felt bushing rather than the white Teflon bushing in it. And a nice, firm, nicely shaped knuckle as well. So those new parts will all be placed in this piano. This is a whippet assembly, an original Steinway part from a 1980 Steinway B, similar to the one we're working on today. This also has Teflon flanges in it, or Teflon bushings in the flanges. We're not going to be replacing these parts, and it's less important to replace the whippets than it is the hammers, shanks, and flanges. And as always, in a university setting, money is one of the things we have to consider. So we're just going for the most important parts. The whippet assembly sits on the keys. This little white felt would sit on the back of a key, and so that gets pushed up and down. And the way the hammer sits on that is this hammer knuckle sits right on top of the jack. This is called the jack. And when you push up on the key, the jack pushes up on the knuckle, which pushes the hammer towards the strings. The things we're going to be adjusting on the whippet will be where the jack is positioned in the repetition lever window. We're going to be adjusting this screw to adjust how high the repetition lever sits above the jack. And another thing that we're going to be taking care of in these original parts is the repetition lever spring. You can see that there is kind of a black gunk on the tip of this spring here. That's an old graphite-based lubricant, and that gums up over 40 years, and it needs to be buffed off and replaced with a more modern lubricant. So that will definitely improve the smoothness of the feel as this repetition lever goes up and down. It makes it much more controllable. Modern substances as opposed to old graphite and lanolin. So now that we've had a chance to talk about the piano and think about it, I'm going to be taking one hammer off of the end of each section, one hammer, shank, and flange assembly, just like this. So take out the screw. And I'm going to remove this part, and I'm sending these parts off to my supplier in Maine, where they will, with the new shanks, flanges, and hammers, get all the angles drilled correctly and arc the tails properly and taper the tails properly so that the weight will match up just right for each hammer, and so that these new parts will fit this piano quite well. This is all work that I could do in my shop, but these are people who are set up to do this. They do a lot of it, and they do it very, very well. And that's something that Steinway in 1980 was not doing nearly as well as they do it now, or nearly as well as my parts replicators will do. We'll get a nice smooth arc on that so that it will meet the back check in a way that it adheres very well to it. We'll have more accurate back checking. That'll be good too. And they're also going to taper the tails from the sides so that each hammer has the right amount of weight so that the touch will be more even. As you're pressing down on the keys, the touch weight will be even. That's something we'll talk about more in my shop. So I'm going to be sending these off to my supplier to get these parts pre-assembled, I guess would be the word for it. And then when I get the parts back, we'll take the action into my shop and put the parts on and take care of all the points of regulation and felt rejuvenation to get this piano playing in the way that we all will be so happy to hear it. It will sound and play so much better. This has been a project I've been looking forward to doing for a long time. I send the hammers from each section so that they can replicate not only the angles of where the hammers are striking the strings, but then they can replicate the weight and the arc the way it has been too. The arc of this tail will be replicated properly. And then another thing is the weight of the hammer. These hammers for this particular action were weighed off when this action was in the factory, and my parts replicator will be able to emulate the weight more accurately. And by having each section represented, they'll be able to replicate the weight much more accurately than just a general go for the average and hope it's right. Each hammer on the piano is different. This is the bass hammer, number 1, the lowest A on the piano. This is number 88, the highest C on the piano. And you can see how much bigger the bass hammer is than the treble hammer. So as I'm sending these off, they will be able to replicate the weight more accurately. Each tail is a little bit different too. The tail on this particular bass hammer is bigger than the tail on this. The whole weight of the hammer, as these hammers are made, they have a solid wood core that's larger at the bass end than it is at the treble end. So my parts preparer will be able to get all the hammers weighing just about the right amount, as well as get all the angles drilled correctly so that the hammers and the shanks line up with the strings properly for this piano. Each Steinway is a custom-built instrument. They're not all exactly the same, so you can't take one 1980 Steinway B and assume that the parts will be exactly the same as another 1980 Steinway B. It's a lot of customization involved. Each new hammer has been sliced off a board, so the felt itself is crowned out a little bit. Where the saw was, that roughs the felt up. So the edges of the hammer, it's usually cupped and curved a little bit like that. So even though they're brand new hammers, I will have to file them down just a tiny little bit in my shop to get the striking surface correctly mated to the strings. That's part of the detailed process. It's highly detailed work. It takes a lot of time and practice to get this process down.